Thank you for inviting me to talk today. Quite interesting as I turned up, walking down the corridor, I saw signs for the Green Team, Intel, Swindon, UK, with the objective to improve their green initiatives to ultimately reduce our carbon footprint. I thought, yep, I like this. And then just having a look at the IT performance report for 2010-2011 and seeing that Intel's a green IT organisation according to Computer World. There's also a quite cool piece of technology in here. So that's actually sort of made me feel quite warm about talking about today. There's some people in here that are actually committed to the green agenda. And some of you will realise that actually green is a win-win, and some of you will be a bit more sceptical, and I hope to persuade you. And I also hope to persuade you or give you some tools that you can actually use to apply a green IT agenda in your organisation. So I'm going to go through what is green, what to consider, and then give you some real examples. First, to tell you something about myself, I formed Perform Green earlier this year with the purpose of helping organisations deliver financial and environmental efficiencies. Prior to that, I've worked for 20 odd years in the environmental sector, in the private sector, the public sector, in NGOs, charities, campaigning organisations, in environmental roles and in corporate roles. Most recently, 5 years as CIO, first in Natural England and then in the Department of Environment, both where I sponsored green IT initiatives. One of those has been written up as the government's Green IT Handbook. So what is green? I googled it actually, just for interest. I'll come into that. So what is green? Why is it important? Why is it important to businesses? What's green IT? And then why is it important to an IT organisation? So I googled green. According to Wikipedia, it's a colour. I didn't know that. Most closely associated with sustainability. And well, what is sustainability? Sustainability is a sort of a three-legged tripod of economic growth, environmental protection, and societal development. And fundamentally and underlying all of this is the recognition that everything you do has a cost. There is a cost for you, but that cost is not always on your balance sheet for your organisation, and it may not actually appear for many years. But someone, somewhere, somewhen will pay that cost. It might be very minute compared to the benefit, but that cost is paid. A good example is carbon emissions, and this is much more traditional. Let's go back to before David Begg, economics, blueprint for a greener for tomorrow, 1980s, which led to everyone paying a lot more for their electricity, for their petrol. By the way, that's the main chemical reaction going on in petrol. That's octane, combusting to create carbon dioxide and a big explosion, lots of heat. But when you start putting the fuel escalator onto fuel in the 1980s. But before that, when you emitted carbon, you didn't have to worry about it. It wasn't your problem. It was somebody else's problem. That somebody else was a government, future generations, or less powerful communities. Examples of less powerful communities being affected by that. If it leads to sea rises, if you live in an island atoll, and your only source of income is the fact that you own the .tv domain name, you haven't really got a lot of power, and therefore you're not going to be able to influence Western societies in quite the same way. Equally, governments paying for flood defences or for cleaning up actions. But an increasingly important is whilst you don't pay for the output, the waste product, you are actually paying for the input. You're paying for energy. And also people are now increasingly paying for emissions. I talked about the fuel price escalator from the 1980s on petrol, but there's a climate change levy and things like that in carbon trading. I'll talk a bit later more about energy in a moment. So why is green important? Well, from environmental, I know people can argue with me on this one, but the only energy coming into the system is from the sun. Everything else on Earth is finite. Now, the reality is yes, there's gravitational forces of the moon. Well, yeah, but there's a small thing called the preservation of momentum going on here. So as you take energy out of that system, actually it slows down the moon and things like that. Quite significant. There's a lot of power in the atom. So yes, there's lots of abundant things, but there are also things that aren't very abundant, like some of the rare earth metals that are critical in the development of IT, or the use in IT. Clearly, you could manufacture those atoms if you had enough energy. Societal, disproportionate use of resources by the richer segments of society, and the disproportionate impacts of pollution events on poorer segments of society, and that happens both nationally and internationally. And then there's economic. It's quite a sobering statistic to remember that in my lifetime, the Earth's population has doubled to 7 billion. And statisticians and actuaries would suggest that by the time I die, the population will have peaked somewhere just short of 11 billion before it starts to decline. That's quite a big number that's actually happened there, 7 billion in my lifetime. So to actually sustain or even maintain, to sustain or improve living standards, you have to increasingly decouple economic growth from the use of environmental resources and emissions. So, quite sobering things to think about. So, moving on to why it's important to business. Well, firstly, there's taxation and regulation. You're taxed to do it, to do an environmental good, or against the environmental bad you're doing, or you're regulated, things are forcing you to do it. But looking at it from the financial perspective, it's about not using things that you don't have to. If you don't have to use it, you don't have to pay for it. The classic one is energy. If you can use less energy, you don't pay for that energy. That is a good financial benefit to an organisation. It reduces the bottom line. Again, reusing and repurposing waste. So avoiding the disposal cost, or actually deriving some sort of income from it. An example of disposal cost is actually putting things in landfill, and landfill's expensive, and recycling waste and actually selling a product that you would otherwise have thrown away and actually getting some economic value out of it. Now, it all sounds a little bit rosy tinted spectacles, or maybe a green tint, but look at Marks and Spencer's. Marks and Spencer's, you've probably all heard about their Plan A. And their Plan A is their environmental sustainability programme. They reported this year that over the past year, they have generated net benefit of £70 million. At the same time, they reported in their annual report that their gross profit for the year was £780 million. That means £1.11 of their gross profit is actually coming from their environmental and sustainability programmes. It's quite an interesting thought. Look at fuel prices. This is, I keep looking down and echoing, I do apologise. 1990 to 2009 fuel prices, these are in real terms. From 1999 to 2009, so that's up to 2 years ago, heavy fuel prices increased by 240%. Gas prices increased by 158%, and electricity prices are raised by 73%. And that was to 2 years ago, and you know what's happened in the last 2 years. My electricity bill at my home went up 17% a couple of months ago. You know, it's quite a lot. A 1 kilowatt hour is costing me 11p at home now, but it is green. So, you know, big financial cost for an organisation. Next one is sales. The ability to win and gain business and protect your brand. There are three models here: business to government, business to customer, and business to business. Business to government. The UK public sector procures £220 billion of products and services annually. They require and mandate all their procurement departments to look for sustainable products. So it's mandated to government procurers. So that's a £220 billion marketplace. Business to customers. More than half of global consumers will prefer to buy products and services from a company with a good environmental reputation. And then business to business. Businesses working to a sustainability agenda or sustainability goal actually do or will require their suppliers to actually do the same. Just look at the stories when a high street retail shop sells a product which it subsequently turns out that their suppliers is actually sourcing from slave labour or from some very bad environmentally polluting activity. That costs those businesses a lot of customers. So business to business, sustainability organisations are actually wanting their suppliers to fulfil the same roles. And then finally, talent management. According to the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development, the HR profession, as it were in the UK, talent attraction and retention is a significant issue for organisations. It's one of the biggest problems that all businesses have. And actually, if you want to drive innovation and create great products, you need real talent to actually produce that. 74% of the UK workers would prefer to work for an organisation with good environmental responsibility or profile. So, again, it's a talent attraction and retention. So it's important to business. Moving on to what is green IT. It's quite simple. It's green and it's IT. But there's two sides to it. Firstly, 2% of carbon emissions are from IT, allegedly. Maybe it's 3% argument. And that's from the use of the current to run the equipment and the cooling to actually cool that equipment down, like server rooms. But that's actually about the same as global aviation. So it's quite a significant amount. And that's before you take into account the cradle and grave elements, which are actually under manufacturing and under other components. So it's not actually in the IT industry. So why is it important for IT organisations? Well, basically, if your company wants to be green, you can help them. Not only by sorting out your own operations, but by the fact that you have a huge influence over the other 98%. Look at the aviation. Can you use IT rather than flying somewhere? So a lot of opportunity there. Secondly, IT departments are being asked to do more with less money. So an efficiency agenda is actually key to them. And the fact you can improve the business case by adding the environmental component is a win-win. So I'll give you a few examples of old world models and new world models. First one, this is a rare minerals mine in the United States, the largest one. So look at the environmental impact of what you're seeing there. During the use of the equipment, it's using energy. And where's that energy coming from? This is the largest coal power station in the US. In Germany, sorry. And then the grave. Whilst it's illegal to do so, even responsibly disposed of waste ends up in Ghana. And in Ghana, children and young adults are trying to recycle electrical waste by burning the plastics off to recover the metals. Unsurprisingly, life expectancy is rather low. And, as I say, even responsibly disposed of electrical waste is ending up there. But what's the New World model? This is the most modern recycling and sorting line in the UK. Well, it was last year. So actually recovering your materials from a recycling activity to reuse it. I thought I'd throw the next one in through the life. This is it. We're in Intel, so I don't know much about this technology, but this is a microprocessor that's powered by sunlight. So it's actually powering itself. So well done, Intel. And I will get at least one more Intel comment in, if I remember. And then the grave. It's actually going back into the cycle, going back to those recycling lines and seeing what else you can recover and put back into the loop. Alternatively, if it's actually still useful equipment, it's just not to the speed and power that you require for your corporate enterprise, is actually how you can actually give it to Africa in a better way. This is IT Schools for Africa. It's a local charity based in Cheltenham, which takes old equipment, makes it safe in terms of data security, and then it goes over to Africa and teaches it and supports education over there. There's some other aspects of what happens in waste and recovery. Believe it or not, these are the same place. This is Averley in Essex. At the top is a big hole in the ground. You might have gathered it's a big hole in the ground. And that's from the removal of the gravels, the glacial gravels that exist around the London basin. Thames Basin to the east of London. It's removed for construction purposes. Leaves a big hole in the ground, but a nice clay liner. So they fill it up with rubbish. And actually watching these sites is quite amazing. This is within a 54 square mile site to the east of London. It's a slightly larger area just to the south of Hertfordshire, which have been basically the way most of the rubbish from London's gone from the last few years. Just watch all the lorries going up and down, just dumping rubbish in these holes. But at the end of the process, I was involved in a project in the end of the 90s that not only did they then cover that land up, put a cap on it, tried to tap the methane, send it somewhere else rather than into the air, but we actually started planting trees on it. In about 50 or 60 years' time, if you go to this area, you'll be in a 54 square mile forest, about the size and likeness to the New Forest in Hampshire. And it was one of 12 community forests, which also went alongside the National Forest. Part of the reason I raise that is that you're also sitting in one of the community forests at the moment, the Great Western Community Forest, which provides a green infrastructure in which the Swindon development is actually being based. I'll skip that one just to improve on time. So, what do you need to consider? Well, the life cycle. You've got to look at the production, the delivery, the operation, any reuse, and then the disposal. So as a business analyst, those are the things that you might be looking at. Firstly, in production. So the production component of it, power to make the materials, to run the manufacturing lines, the materials that are going into it, and the waste that will be coming out of that, you know, the cut-offs, etc. The delivery of that product into your operating environment, and then you've got to think about the transport and packaging. I wasn't going to tell you this story, but just talking to someone earlier, I thought it might be quite interesting. I outsourced my IT department for Natural England when it's formed in 2006. And we needed to migrate 3 different IT platforms onto a single IT platform, and I got my IT outsource organisation to do it. After a couple of pilot sites, small sites, we went into one of our biggest offices, which was in Peterborough, to roll out 300 laptops to employees based in that space. I got a phone call after the end of the week from sustainability manager for Natural England, giving me a real earful for what was happening to power consumption within the Peterborough office. I was thinking, well, I don't understand what's going on there. Anyway, so a week later, I went to Peterborough to see how it was going. I'm based in Cheltenham. And I took one look and I could see what was happening. Van was turning up at the loading bay, unloading loads of laptops, all in big boxes and plastic wrappers and things. They were taking it from the loading bay to the lifts, up to the 5th floor, which was where the IT engineers were actually loading the software onto it before taking it back downstairs again to the staff for deployment. And then at the end of each day, they were then putting all the empty packaging back into the lift and taking it back down again and out to the back. Not too surprising here that the next week, we moved the IT engineers who were doing the software loads down to the ground floor into one of the meeting rooms, and we actually saw the power just drop off. So, you know, it's just thinking about things like that. Not only that, as I actually phoned up the manufacturer and I said, if you have to continue supplying those to us, I want them without any boxes on them. So that's production and delivery. Looking at power. So where's the power usage here? Look at your energy suppliers. You know, is there any other way of getting energy? Can you put photovoltaic cells on the roof? Is there any heat source pumps you could put in to generate power that way? Also look at the equipment behaviours, because actually you'd be surprised with how different pieces of equipment behave in terms of their use of power. And I'll come back to that in a second. And then heat, because as you run your computer or your server or whatever, it's generating heat. So you've got to think about how that equipment's being cooled. Is it running a fan? Takes more power. And then your air conditioning. So looking at that operating site. Going on to reuse. It might not be actually suitable for your business purposes any longer. It's so common that people are wanting bigger and bigger applications, using more and more power. Well, now everyone wants a tablet. Don't blame them. I quite like them myself. You know, So you're actually moving on your business, but that's leaving kit behind. What are you doing with that? Because actually some of it's still useful. Do you reuse some of the components? Or can you actually maybe give it to Silver Surfers, charities or NGOs? On the drive here, I do apologise, I was listening to Radio 4 and there was a interview with somebody. Apparently, giving access to somebody who's disabled in the UK, giving them better access to the internet, whether that's giving them a computer or making websites more accessible, is worth £200 a year to them in terms of their wealth. And if you are disabled, the chances are you're going to be on a lower income than the rest of the population. There's quite a significant opportunity there. And the charities and NGOs that I've mentioned previously, like IT Schools for Africa. And then you go on to the disposal phase. So what are you actually going to do with the equipment when you finally finish with it? It cannot be reused. You're going to burn it, you're going to landfill it, or you're going to recycle it, and how much of that is recyclable? And actually, the more you want more and more recyclable components going into the original production, so you can use it here. So where do you start? Well, you start in actually understanding some of the equipment, understanding some of the footprints, what assets you've got, looking at some of the boundaries of your service wrapper, looking at your supply chain, how your supplier is behaving. One of my outsourced partners once was IBM, and the project executive, which is what they called the person at the top of the initiative, of the outsource, he started getting the number 11 bus from Victoria Station to meetings with me, and making his own colleagues do that. And he always used to just take the mick out of everyone if they actually turned up by taxi, which is the standard IBM way. And you could actually see it ripple through his organisation as he started doing it and he started making that shift. So, you know, changing the suppliers, identifying the hotspots, and making the case for action. So, I'm going to give you some examples, and these are real-life examples, and talk about some of the techniques that you can also apply. So, some of the things I'm going to cover here: employee behaviour, power, decommissioning, rationalisation, tiering, print optimisation, virtualisation, data centres, and the 98%. Employee behaviour. If you can change employee behaviour, it's probably the best thing you can do for the environment before you start doing all your other technology things. But it always says easy. People say, oh yeah, just change the way that people work. They're going to turn things off when they're not going to use them. They're not going to use things they don't need to use. They can recycle stuff, etc. They'll do all these things. Well, they won't actually. It's really, really quite difficult. And trying to change the way that people behave is critical. And it doesn't matter if it's green or it's information security or anything else. Inappropriate behaviours will always reduce the benefit and the impact. And one of the tools that we've developed is actually a green performance indicator, which tries to actually identify how well aware people are and how well they understand the messages, and then what their behaviour is. It's based on a training model called Kirkpatrick, where you go, with awareness, people develop understanding. As people understand things, they start to behave in certain ways, and once you've got the behaviour, you start getting the results. But what you want to do is not train 2,500 employees. You want to know where it is in the organisation, if it's a level in the organisation or a division in the organisation, where performance is not happening, and trying to understand that and resolve it. Looking at power. I'm not reading all these out, but first thing to say about power is don't believe a word of what the manufacturer says is the operating power of any piece of equipment. What's stamped on the box is not what you're going to receive, for various reasons, including changes in manufacturing processes, the conditions it was tested under, the atmospheric conditions, but most importantly, the software or application you might be running on that piece of kit and how it's making that piece of kit work. But nonetheless, it's useful looking at some of this. PCs, 70 watts per hour, turned on, turned off, 2 watts per hour. Laptops, 35 watts per hour, turned on, 0.2 watts per hour, turned off. Servers, 200 watts per hour, on and off, because you don't generally turn them off. Similar things with storage and cooling. You don't tend to turn your cooling off in your data center day and night. Interestingly, my favourite piece of computer equipment is this, from Maplin's, £9.99. Plug it in and watch actually what your computer's really doing. I find it really strange. It consumes 3 times as much power when I'm using it if it's running its antivirus software or accessing and twice as much if it's accessing the internet than if I'm just doing some word processing. You actually watch the laptop's power go up and down. But that will tell you what it really performs like under your operating conditions. And you start plugging it into all sorts of things. I love spider phones. Spider phones are great. They're great for the environment because people actually do audio conferencing rather than travel to their meeting. I've never seen anyone turn one off. I always see them turned on, just ticking away in the background, consuming 8 watts per hour. So, useful thing to think about. I'm not going to tell you how to go about decommissioning, machinization, tiering, any of that. This is pretty standard skill sets for people. But you need to remember that every opportunity to turn something off is helping the environment. It improves the business case to do it. Decommissioning an application results in fewer servers. And those fewer servers takes less current, less ampage going through it, less cooling required. It saves environmental benefits as well as the equipment running costs. And that's the general principle that goes through all this. And this is the bit where I was going to remember the other Intel thing. So apparently Intel have got a really nifty bit of technology which finds out if servers are being used. It's an application that analyzes server utilization within design computing environment and then you can turn off servers because they're being underutilized. Useful thing to know. Application rationalization and tiering. Again, turn things off that you're not using. You'll be surprised. The other thing is when you can find 2 applications where you can get one of those applications to do the job of the other one and you can turn the other one off, rationalization. In one organization, we were able to reduce our applications from 1,000 to 300. And I'll tell you, I won't tell you a story. I haven't got time for the story about what I did to do that, but it was a little bit of a culture shock in a core government department, I can tell you. The other one's tiering. What do I mean by tiering? It's about your service support level you've got on the equipment. Typically an email platform, everyone has to have it 24/7, 99.99% of the time. To achieve that, you're going to have multiple stacks operating alongside each other and a fallover stack sitting behind it, so that if anything goes down, it switches to the other piece of kit. You're running several bits of redundant equipment just in case. Of course, that's consuming energy. If you can actually reduce the level of support on some of those and say, actually, I don't mind if that application goes down, I don't mind just rebooting the servers, you can run less server to support it. So you can save equipment that way. Print optimization. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail around this, but in one London site last year, it was costing us £160,000 a year to provide multifunctional printers, normal printers, faxers, photocopiers, etc., scanners. By reducing the number of devices per person from 1 to 8 printers to 1 to 16, by putting multifunctional devices in instead of the copiers and the scanners and the faxers, we were able, and also in that by standardizing the environment as well, so that we didn't have to keep as much replacements and kit in stock to keep things going, we brought the cost down to £106,000 a year. So that's £50,000 essentially, or 1/3 savings in one initiative. And that money also was saved carbon. And people forget the simple things. If you take a piece of paper on Microsoft Word and print it out, normal settings, it's got wide margins. You can set it to have narrow margins. If you put narrow margins in, you can get 20% more print area on a sheet of A4. It doesn't save you toner or printing, but it does save you paper. There's always worth looking at things like that. In Natural England, we created whole new corporate templates and loaded them onto everyone's computer, so that actually forced everyone to use those. Virtualization. I'm not going to go into virtualization. This is very much at the technical end of stuff. This is not business analyst. This is TDA stuff, really. But it's all part of the same piece, and I thought I'd include it in here around decommissioning, rationalization, and tiering. Again, it's about putting your applications onto fewer servers by applying virtualization, but it saves you servers. And again, that can only be good energy usage and heating. Data centers, fascinating thing. Apparently, it's alleged to do a Google search costs 0.7 grams of carbon. That's some data center usage. I say alleged. Google claim that that's not true. They claim it's less than half of that. Although if you Google it, it still says 0.7. But that explains why Facebook, when they wanted to create their new data centers that they've announced for Europe, they're putting them in North Sweden. Why? Because the air temperature there is cold. It's about 1 degree, so they don't actually need air conditioning. They can use passive cooling. They open the window and let the cold air in. 2, it's a lot of cheap. There's a lot of cheap hydroelectric power. So they don't emit a lot of carbon, and they're getting cheaper energy. So they're saving an awful lot by putting their data center in North Sweden, which is just as well because it's 12 football pitches, the server farm they're putting in there, which interestingly I found out last week is 6 times the size of the server farm in GCHQ up the road from where I live. Right, so what should you do in data centers? We've turned off loads of servers, so that's a lot of improvement. Turn the thermostat up. A number of times I walk into server rooms and it's cold in there. The standard operating temperature for old equipment is around 21 degrees, so you can actually put the temperature up. And more modern equipment, temperature, it'll be happy at 25 or 30 degrees. It doesn't have to be cold in a server room, so turn the thermostat up. Improve the ventilation, open a window, and I kid you not on this one. And then cull and archive active data. Data actually that's active uses energy, spinning disks, etc. So, and if you think about the way that mailboxes are constructed, you'll have a copy of your mailbox on your computer. You'll have it in the local server room in the room that you're building you're in, and in a central data center. And given that it's one that people will always have at a very high tiering level, high support level, there'll be multiple versions of it sitting around in the data center. So the first thing you can do is reduce people's mailbox sizes. And not only is that good for the environment, it's not only good for financial costs, it actually helps you for information security as well. Less things are actually out there and available all the time. So this is a data center in London at a government department I might have worked for this year, from the 1st of January this year to the 31st of March this year. So we did a couple of things, and there's 4 major points to note here. The first one, you'll see that there's a power spike. We're consuming more power. What happened was that we had to do some repairs on the roof of the building, and in doing those repairs, the company that did it actually left a piece of wood propped up against the air conditioning vent. It occluded the way that the air conditioning vent was working, so the air conditioning unit has to work a lot harder, and it started consuming power. We only realised the problem because we were looking at the power curve. We didn't realise the problem because anyone had gone up and noticed that there was a piece of wood against the vent. So as soon as we fixed that, it got better. The next thing we did, believe it or not, and this is what I say, I kid you not, we have a power drop when we moved some floor grills. We moved the place where the grill was in the floor from one place to 1 metre away. It just helped the way the air flowed, and that saved us a lot. The next two power drops are actually from when we started removing storage devices as a result of reducing our email box sizes. Not only is that a sloping graph down, reducing the amount of power that we were using, that is actually during a period you expect the power to be increasing because the air temperature external to the building is going up. It gets warmer as you go into February and March and into April. So you would have expected that to be going up. So that's actually an even more significant impact than it would have otherwise been. It's easy to think that IT is a bad thing, but actually IT is one of the good guys. I can't see quite how aviation can help the environment, except that you can go and see, people can go and see and study things to learn more about the implications of what's happening in Britain is having in sub-Saharan Africa. But actually IT helps you with education and learning and actually data modelling and, you know, talk to the guys down in the Met Office in Exeter and what they're doing and what they're learning. IT is actually mostly part of the solution. It's actually one of the good guys. So what is it that you can do to actually change the way that your organisation works? In Natural England, we were doing a deployment. As I said, we integrated 3 IT systems. It was a great job to have got. I turned up on the 1st of October 2006 and I was told, by the way, Chief Information Officer, we need to do something about our IT system. It's our first day and we don't know what to do. Took one look at it and I had an outsourced IT environment over there running Lotus Notes, another outsourced IT department over there with another supplier running Microsoft Office, and another IT department over there which was mostly in-house and running on GroupWise. And then someone said, well, we really would like to be able to send each other emails reliably, and and the chief executive would like to see a management board's calendars. So rather a challenge. So I had to outsource and do a big migration. But in doing that, I said, right, okay, one device. So, you know, your 114,000 devices across your 90,000 employees, I said, well, there's 2,700 employees, therefore there's 2,700 devices. One device, and not only is that one device, it's a laptop. Now, okay, 1 or 2 people persuaded me that they could have a desktop because they were manipulating graphical data, but for general purpose it was fine. And with the laptop and working with the HR department and the way that our performance management system was operating and our HR processes, we introduced quite very flexible working. And in doing that, people spent more time with the clients, and also people typically worked at home at least 1 day a week, which actually resulted in the fact that we found out that people only on average spent 60% of the time in an office. So what did we do? We shut 40% of the offices and 40% of the office space. What did that do? That saved us light, that saved us heating, and it saved us land rent. It's quite a significant thing. Now, the last thing I did, my parting shot in DEFRA, and I don't know quite how it's proceeding. I'm seeing them next week. I'll ask them. I started asking a question last year. Why do people have a mobile phone and a landline? Because your landline consumes power. There's a switch in a room somewhere. It takes energy to manufacture. It needs to be disposed of. Your phone and uses power to be used. But if you've got a mobile and you need the mobile for your other flexible working, then why have both bits of kit? So I introduced a policy as my parting shot to 4,000 employees. By the way, if you want to have a landline, you've got to write a business case. Otherwise, you're going to have a mobile. And the sort of things that we would accept on a business case is there's no mobile phone signal. So Natural England, I mentioned it a few times. It was created 2006. Interesting organisation. It's a quango, use the pejorative term. Formed from merging 3 organisations. It has some unique problems by merging 3 organisations in that the staff were heavily distributed, only within England, but heavily distributed across 50 locations. The chief executive wanted to make a name for herself, so she decided within 3 months of the organisation existing that she wanted a 50% reduction in the carbon footprint within 3 years. That's nothing like things like that to focus the mind. I would say she missed the target. She failed to reduce the carbon footprint by 50% in 3 years, by 4 days. Just 4 days later, at the end of the 3 years, she achieved it. Very, very impressive, and it took a lot of organisational focus. But there were some areas where we made quite easy inroads. Average mileage was 14 million kilometres per annum. And we worked out that an average journey between offices was leading to an emission of 80 kilos of carbon and costing us about 45 quid. So obviously an opportunity to tackle that. So we introduced webinars, which are red, teleconferencing blue, and video conferencing yellow. Well, clearly we had a bit of teleconferencing before, but it pushed it hard. From September 2008 to September 2010, that shows the growth in usage of those various approaches to remote working. To the extent that by September last year, Natural England did 12,000 minutes of audio conference. Put another way, that's actually time elapsed in audio conference, not amount of time spent in audio conferencing. If the average number of people in an audio conference is 5, it'd be 5 times that. The 12,000 minutes of audio conferencing, 200 hours a month. And that translated into real savings. By month 3, so by that one, the savings that we were reporting were £10,000 per month. So we saved £10,000 per month. Interestingly, whilst we saw steady growth over 2 years of audio conferencing and video conferencing use and webinars, the savings actually peaked off within 10 months. And the reason was people started having meetings that they wouldn't have otherwise bothered to have. So it actually started creating a meeting culture. And that was something that needed to be tackled. But what did we learn about this? Because lots of people introduce these technologies and it's not taken up. Why is that? That's because people forgot the human dimension. Yeah? We learned an awful lot about audio conferencing and video conferencing and making them successful. We did train people in using them. And we did actually develop protocols and teach people what those protocols were. So, for instance, we actually said that if you're going to have an audio conference, there's got to be an agenda. Because people, with audio conferences, they don't somehow forget all good meeting practice. We used to have virtual coffee. So the meeting would start with virtual coffee for 5 minutes. So people would come in, you're all having a cup of coffee, someone will talk about them being on holiday, which is what normally happens in a meeting, and then you settle down 5 minutes into it. 2, most people get bored about 90 minutes into a meeting, physical meeting. In audio conferencing, it's about 60 minutes. Although rather unfortunately in Natural England, it became a bit of a pejorative because my boss started calling them Barney breaks because I was a smoker. I was. And as a smoker, I started getting ratty at about 60 minutes because I wanted a fag. But we actually found out that the meetings were a lot more successful if we actually took a 10-minute break, 60 minutes into the meeting, and actually break it up, same as you would in a normal meeting, and let people have a comfort break. So we started doing things like that. And the other thing we did is we put 5 minutes learning points at the end of each meeting, so that we said, well, okay, what did we learn from that? What could we have done better to make that a more efficient, effective meeting? And we actually built in that continuous improvement into the cycle. And that is what made it work. But what made it really work was people like me with 20 staff in 25 locations in the country wanting to spend some more time at home. So actually the ability to work from my home or from a local office rather than having to go to see my team in Peterborough, in Newcastle or down in Exeter was actually a good thing for me. So actually there was a big driver from staff themselves. So some conclusions I'd like to just draw. There's a lot you can do with IT to save money and to save the environment. There are lots of things you can do in its operation. But actually, IT is one of the good things. It's the thing that can actually tackle the 98% very, very effectively. It's well worth investing in it and looking at it. But you need to know where your key carbon impacts are and other environmental impacts. You need to see that you can't sit on the fence, actually, because this is actually happening in our lifetime now. There are challenges, but those challenges create opportunities. There are quick wins and visibilities. But most of the techniques that I've shown you are actually standard business practice. I've just applied it to the environment. I've just told you the environment part of the story. This is actually stuff that you would be doing anyway, many times. All the technical people, technical design authorities, etc. But, and in finishing, just think about what Albert Einstein said. It takes new ways of thinking to solve the problems caused by the old ways of thinking. And thank you very much.